In this lesson, we'll animate our wheel spin using expressions. So we're picking up directly where we left off in the last lesson. And before we actually animate the wheel spin, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning. As it is right now, we've got this really cool model of our wheel and tire and everything. But if we look back at the object level, it exists in a separate container. And really what I want is for all of that geometry and those nodes to exist within the same container as the body of the car. Now, instead of just grabbing all of these and copying them individually over into that concept car container, I want to group them up. Now, to group them up, it's very simple. We just want to make sure that we have everything selected here in our viewport. You can use the keyboard shortcut Control-A to select all, or you can just drag a marquee around all of the nodes. Just make sure that you get them all. And then we're going to press this icon that looks like a little cardboard box. It's the first one from the right-hand side of the toolbar in the network view. And if you'll hover over it for just a second, you'll get the keyboard shortcut as well. It says Create Subnetwork from Selected, or Shift-C. So I'm just going to click on that. And you'll notice that all of my nodes seem to have disappeared. But they really didn't disappear. What happened was we created this new container, and all of the nodes were moved inside of that new container. Now there's some other little nodes in here that we got automatically. Don't worry about these for right now. We'll discuss them here in just a second. For now, oops, I accidentally turned on my display normals here. No big deal, we'll just turn those off. So what we need to do is grab this subnet 1 and we're going to move it over into the concept car container at the object level. So we'll just grab it, do a Control-X, that will cut that whole group of nodes out. We'll go back up to the object level, dive inside the concept car, and do a Control-V to paste. You can also use the Edit, Cut, Copy, and Paste menu, but there are the shortcuts right there. So what we've got now is the subnet 1 here, which is actually our wheel assembly, existing within the same container as the concept car. And that's just going to keep things a little cleaner. Instead of having things spread out all over the network, we want all of the car elements within that root concept car. Now, coming back up to object level, and since the wheel assembly now is empty, I'm just going to select it and hit delete on the keyboard. And that will remove that container from the node network. I'm also going to dive back inside the concept car, and instead of this group of nodes here being named subnet 1, it's probably a little more practical if we named it something more appropriate. I'm going to call it wheel 1. So I'm going to double click on it there and just type in wheel_1. So now let's dive inside of our newly named wheel_1 subnetwork. And so these are all of the nodes that make up our wheel. Well, we want to add a little bit of rotation. We want to be able to have the wheels move when the car moves in our scene. So I'm going to add a transform node. That transform node will allow me to add some rotation to that tire and wheel assembly. So again, we can just use our tab menu. We'll hit tab and begin to type out the word transform. I get my node here. I'm just going to place it in the node network. I'm going to make sure that it's wired up and move my display flag down to the transform to node. Make sure I have my handle tool selected from the toolbar on the left. I'm just going to zoom out here a little bit and look and see what we've got going on. So I see that I can actually rotate this now, but that the pivot point is not located at the center of the tire and wheel assembly. And we've faced this problem before whenever we were modeling and we added this little twist to the inside of the brake drum. The way that we do it is we copy the center or transform location from our original circle, and we can use that to drive wherever the pivot was located. So let's just duplicate that procedure again here. We'll come back up to circle 1. We'll right click on the center parameter. We will copy that parameter. I'm just going to come back in my node network down here to my final transform node that I just laid down, this transform 2. In my parameter view, we want to come down to pivot. I'll right click on pivot and choose paste copied relative references. When I do, that pivot snaps to the exact center of the original circle that we used to modify and build out the brake drum. Now, whenever I want to rotate my tire and wheel assembly, it rotates and spins as we would expect it to for a vehicle, right around the center of the wheel. Now notice as I'm changing this here in the viewport and moving this handle to rotate, what's happening in the parameters view? Well, the parameters view is actually updating in the degrees of rotation that I'm rotating this wheel assembly. Now, it's possible that we could use basic traditional keyframe animation, and we will talk about that here in a future lesson. But for now, since we're already working with expressions, let's talk about using another expression. Here across the bottom of the interface, we see that we have all of our playback controls. Here we can play the scene forward. We can stop, rewind, all of that stuff right here with these playback controls. And we also have a timeline here that tells us what frame it is that we're currently viewing. And notice that the frame number is also available here. You can type in a specific frame number if you'd like to go to frame 120. Just type it in right here and your timeline will move directly to 120. But I'm noticing a correlation between the fact that as I move my frames forward, this number, I could use this number here to actually drive the rotation of the tire and wheel assembly. So if I want, as I hit play on my timeline, this frame number could actually be used to add rotation in the X direction. You can accomplish that very, very easily just by using a simple expression. It's actually only 2 characters. Now let's go ahead and just set this back to 0 so that our rotation is starting from a default position of 0. And to move this frame number up into the rotate property, all you need to do is type in $ and then capital F. And you do need to use a capital letter F here. So as I move through my timeline now, the frame number is actually driving the rotation of the wheel assembly. Now, at first, whenever we hit play to see this animate on its own, it happens very, very fast. You can see how quickly the frame numbers are moving. We actually don't want them to rotate quite that fast. What we want to do is make sure that we're watching the playback of the timeline in real time. What's happening is that Houdini is able to calculate that rotation so fast that it's actually faster than real time. So what you're seeing is sort of an accelerated playback of the timeline. In order to make sure that the timeline is playing back the way that it will whenever the scene is rendered and at actual real time, you just need to click this little icon on the lower part of the interface here, and it says Real Time Toggle. And if you'll click it, you'll notice it'll highlight in this sort of orange-yellow color. Now when we click play on our timeline, we're seeing it at its actual real-time speed, which is a little bit slow for my taste. Or maybe I'd want it a little faster. In general, I'd like to have a little more control over how fast the wheel moves. It's good that we have the frame rate automatically driving the rotation, but I'd like to have the control and the ability to say how fast is it going to go. Well, we'll do that using a custom parameter, and we'll talk about that at the beginning of the next lesson.